Hey, this isn't another CZ video. Come on, go on, get out of here. Go on. Ah, much better. What's up YouTube? KS Gun Guy here. Thanks for joining me today as always. So not too long ago, I put out a video about the Sig Sauer P320 RX coming back from Sig Sauer after the voluntary upgrade. And as you guys may know, I was a little bit critical of the work that Sig did on the gun. There were a couple of things. I thought that the trigger was not improved. Now that's on me more than on the gun. They didn't really advertise that it was going to be improved as much as it was going to be fixed to make sure that it was drop safe. So I kind of put that more on me than on the gun. But then also the slide had a little bit of a hang up, and I thought the millwork wasn't quite as good as I would have liked it to have been. So again, I was a little bit critical. So I thought, you know what? It's time to get a little P320 redemption, and that's what we're here to talk about today. I've got for you guys the Sig Sauer P320 VTAC, and it's the X-VTAC. It's part of their X series that came out. They've got the X5, the X-Carry, and now the X-VTAC. So really excited to bring this to you guys and talk about it just a little bit. So let's go ahead and knock some specs out of the way. The overall length is 8.2 inches. The height is 5.6 inches. The barrel length is 4.7 inches. And the width, and we'll get a good look at that, is 1.3 inches. The weight unloaded is 28.7 ounces. Now the magazine capacity is 17 rounds. Now it does come with 3 magazines, and really quickly before I forget, unfortunately your old P320 17 round magazines will not work in this, and the reason is this little lip, this guy right here. They've sculpted it or scalloped it just a little bit differently than the old magazine. So unfortunately, the 3 or 4 magazines I have lying around will not work in this without at least doing a little bit of Dremel work and that sort of thing, which is fine. I'm not afraid to do that, but I think it's unfortunate and a little bit of an oversight from Sig Sauer. I would have liked to have seen all of their magazines be interchangeable, but hey, marketing, right? So aside from that, the slide finish on the gun is a flat dark earth, although I would say it's a little bit more of a copper, and actually I think that's one of the most attractive parts about this gun. I was not really looking to buy a firearm, but I just happened to walk into one of the local toy stores around here in Kansas City, and was actually on a mission to do something else there, and I walked by this Sig counter, and lo and behold, this guy caught my attention, and I thought, is that a VTAC right there? I haven't seen one, and I don't think there are really that many on the market right now. Sig is notorious for putting out guns in very small doses, unfortunately. So I had to get it. It's been one on the wish list since they announced it. So it was a good find for sure, even though a little bit premature from what I usually plan for doing. But it is what it is. So the frame material, of course, is polymer on this, and once again, it does carry forward that Sig P320 modularity. It does have that modular trigger system in it, just like all of the other P320s. So the serialized part, and there's your serial number right there, it's actually part of that trigger module. Now, this is an updated or upgraded, I use that word loosely, trigger module, so it is the drop-safe version of it. That's probably one of the reasons why the VTAC took a little bit longer to get out. Now, I know there's some X-Carries out there, and of course the X5 is, but again, this is the updated version right here. So let's go ahead and talk about some of the features of this firearm here real quick. And the first thing I'm going to show you, and unfortunately you're not going to be able to see it very well, but I'll try and capture it in the light at least at least a little bit, if at all possible. It's probably not going to happen, but there is actually a little bit of a bevel in that magwell, and it's actually really nice. It's actually it's pretty subtle, but it goes quite a ways in there, and it makes the magazine insertion on this incredibly easy. So it's one thing I really like about this, and it does not make the frame stand out any wider, which is really cool too, or just barely any wider. So it makes it really more internal than anything else, unlike something like maybe a Glock Gen 5, something like that. So really cool feature there. Now from a grip texture standpoint, this shares the same grip texture as the X5 and the X-Carry, and it's just barely a little bit more aggressive than your standard P320. Not by much, but it is actually a little bit noticeable, and they've got the Sig emblem up here as well, and of course they carry that texture both on the back straps as well as on the front straps. So try and capture that in focus a little bit. So from a grip texture standpoint, I actually really like this texture. I think it's just aggressive enough. Now it's still pretty soft. I mean, it absolutely does not beat up your hands, but it does allow you to get a pretty decent purchase on it, even if you have wet hands or sweaty hands or anything like that. And my hands are kind of a little bit sweaty, especially under these lights. So it definitely allows for a pretty good purchase there, which is really nice. Now, one thing that I've criticized the X5, which I've done a review on, be sure to check that out. It's somewhere in the video library. This grip frame, you'll notice it's pretty wide, especially under that beaver tail as you get towards the upper portion of your grip right through here. And it's very different from the P320, the regular grip module, where they've done a little bit of an indentation or recess for your thumb and just to make it a little bit more comfortable, a little bit more narrow. I would have liked them to have done the same thing here or something similar to that, because that really is pretty wide. Now, I've got reasonably decent sized hands, so it's still pretty comfortable, but if you've got smaller hands, this gun might be a little bit of a challenge or a chore for you to shoot. Now, it's just a guess. I mean, obviously, I can only go off of my own size hands, but it's pretty stout for sure. Now, the magazine release button is not ambidextrous out of the box. However, you can swap it just like other P320s, so nothing really different there. And you'll notice on this, it does have a little bit of a grip contour right there. It's got a nice undercut under the trigger housing right there, which is really nice. And it also rides pretty high under that beaver tail, so it does allow for actually a pretty good grip on this gun. I've shared it with several other people at Centerfire Shooting Sports and at Frontier Justice, and all of them thought it was pretty comfortable. It felt pretty good in the hand, and for a P320, I mean, it sits very nicely. So Sig did overall a really good job with that. Now, it does have an accessory rail for lights, lasers, grenade launchers, as you would expect. And the slide lock, slide release lever right here is ambidextrous, also out of the box. And it definitely serves as a release just as much as it does a lock. So they did a good job with that. Now, the release lever is exactly the same as the other P320s in the line regardless, so if you're used to taking apart a P320, you know, locking the slide back and turning down your takedown lever and then just popping that slide off, it's exactly the same, so no difference there. So it's kind of nice that they've made that universal functionality there. So that's the grip overall. Of course, we're going to come back to the trigger after our shooting. From a slide perspective, now it does have serrations both on the back and the front, and they're really nice. They're really usable serrations. You get a good bite, a good purchase on them. They definitely work for your press checks. I almost lost that word there, and certainly your overhanded racks as well. So they did a good job with that. Now, it does have lightning cuts here to reduce a little bit of that slide mass. I don't think it makes entirely too much of a difference. If nothing else, I think it just looks kind of cool. And then they do have that Viking tactic emblem right there, which is kind of nice, the X-VTAC rather. And it's subtle. It's not glaring. It's not a poster board or anything like that. But again, I think it looks really nice. Now, from a sight perspective, here's the other thing that's really unique about this gun. If you're familiar with the VTAC or Viking Tactic sight systems, they're a little bit different than most of our other sights out there. You'll notice that there is a fiber optic rod on top, and it's a 3-dot setup, front and rear. But then it also has a tritium post right underneath it. So it's actually two different sets of sights in one. And they do it a little bit different because they make it on top and on bottom. See if I can focus that in there so you can see both of those two sets of sights right there. Same thing on the front post as well. And it's really cool. It's a really neat setup. I did a review very early on in the channel of the Smith & Wesson M&P VTAC, and I really liked that gun. But one thing I noticed with that, just like this, it tends to shoot just a little bit low. And I think part of that is because, for me at least, I basically line the top of the sights, and that's probably not a great habit, but I just do because Glocks tend to work that way and other guns that I shoot a lot. So I line the top of the sights up with the middle of the target, and generally that works. But in this case, and you'll see in some of the not fantastic shooting I've done with this gun, that everything seems to print just a little bit lower, a little bit inconsistent. So I think a lot of that, again, has to do with the height of the sights, and then also the two different beads, because, you know, your eyes have to adjust a little bit to the sights depending on what you're trying to look at. So so making sure you focus on the right part of the sight can definitely make a little bit of a difference, or at least it does for me. Now, it does have serrations on the front to reduce a little bit of glare as well. So I think Sig Sauer, by and large, is basically thought of everything with this gun. So that's the features and the specs of the gun. Of course, when we come back, we're going to take a look at the trigger and see how that does. But first, let's take a look at a little bit of shooting and see how it does. Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that footage at the range. So from a shooting perspective, the P320 X-VTAC is an incredibly soft shooter. That's something that I noted and some of the other guys that shot it noted as well. I mean, it just absorbs recoil really well, and it's actually a lot of fun to shoot. Now, I made the mistake of shooting this along with the Hudson and the CZ Shadow 2, and those two guns tend to spoil you just a little bit. They're pretty heavy, and they're just incredibly soft shooters, and so walking into this right after shooting both of those, I probably put myself and the gun at a little bit of a disadvantage, or at least I'm making that excuse to make myself feel better. But either way, it was a ton of fun to shoot, even though it wasn't quite as accurate, perhaps, in my hands as I would have liked to have been. But I'm going to continue to shoot it and kind of dial it in just a little bit more. But again, really a lot of fun to shoot at the range, and definitely a keeper. So let's go ahead and take a look at this trigger and see what it is all about. Now the trigger measures right around 6 pounds, which is about right for a P320 trigger. Now I had one other P320 that was closer to 7 pounds, but they kind of sit right around that 6 or 7 pound margin right there. Now this is the updated or upgraded trigger system in it, so it's got the millwork and it's got the newer trigger modules, some of the new components in it, so it is drop safe and everything, and it does act just a little bit differently than some of the older P320s, but this one definitely feels really good. So from a trigger pull perspective, let's go ahead and take a look at our uptake. You know, you blink and you miss it. I mean, it's just right there. It basically is almost right at the wall and ready to go through your brake, and there's your brake, and it's got kind of that P320 thud a little bit. I mean, it's reasonably crisp, but probably not as crisp as some other guns out there. I know you SIG guys are going to be hating me for this. But then our reset is right there, and the reset is fantastic. This actually is the best reset of any P320 I've had, and I think I've had 4 or 5 on the channel at this point in time. So in fact, I've had 5, I think, and this one is by far the best reset. So let's take a look at that again. So there's your uptake right there, and then your wall and your brake right there, and then your reset right there, and you're back out to the start. So overall, this trigger feels fantastic, and as you move through that trigger, you'll notice that that trigger does become a 90-degree angle. It's one of the real advantages of this flat-face trigger. It just doesn't have very far to go. I mean, there's not a lot of distance between the start and your brake, and it just becomes really flat. And another nice thing, it doesn't go all the way back to the end of the trigger housing. It stays out, probably almost a half an inch, not quite, but it just feels really good. Now, one thing I am going to be doing to this gun a little bit later on, so stay tuned for it. I'm going to be throwing in an Apex Flat Advanced trigger for this. Now, it's the updated trigger. If you're going to be doing this sort of thing, make sure you get the right trigger for the updated trigger module, or the old one if you have the old trigger module, that sort of thing. But I'm going to throw this in here because Apex says that this lowers the poundage by somewhere between 1 and 2 pounds. So we're going to try that out and see how that works at a later time, and I'm really excited about that. But anyway, so again, as far as out of the box trigger, even with the updated trigger module, this actually, you know, it feels really good. It's a really good trigger, and overall from a shooting perspective, I mean, it really is just a lot of fun to shoot. So I'm looking forward to continuing to take this to the range and hopefully shoot it a little bit better than I have so far. But again, a lot of fun. So what do I think of the Sig Sauer P320 X-VTAC overall? Guys, it's a great gun. I mean, it really is. I think Sig hit a home run with this, just like their other guns in the X lineup. I mean, I really think they've done a great job. There are a couple things I would have liked to have seen tweaked a little bit, especially this grip module, a little bit less material towards the top. That's pretty nitpicking. Other people would probably disagree with me on that. That would just be a personal thing. But other than that, they've really done a great job with this. So I'm excited to hear what you guys have to say about this. If you've got any experience with any of the X lineup, whether it's the Carry or the X5 or the VTAC or any of the other P320s, I'd love to hear your feedback on that. And hopefully it's better feedback than the P320 returns video, but we'll see what happens. So guys, thanks so much for joining me. I really appreciate it, and look forward to seeing you next time. Take care and have a great one.